What do you think is the proper blend between the time spent on nurturing or training or ongoing sort of learning out efforts relative to their core requirements, which is, kind of the doing of their job? Have you identified, is there a 10% training every day to 90%? How do you all think of that in terms of the proper time allocation or resources allocation for, continuing education?
With all the tools we have out there, right? We've got things embedded with Gong, we've got things with Udemy, we've got things with Salesforce, we've got all these different embedded tools to bring intelligence to our sellers. So when they're in front of a client, they have the latest, most up-to-date information at their fingertips. But if all we're doing as sellers is reading that information as a transcript when we're talking to our client, we don't add any value.
Are you identifying those traits through an interview process, or are you mostly looking to their historical behavior in previous organizations and speaking to their references? What do you rely on most in those situations? Hi, welcome to the Sales Elevation Podcast. My name is Ed Kerr, and today I'm excited to have Stephanie Broadright on the show. Stephanie has had an illustrative career in sales, and she is currently at Korn Ferry, where she is the global head of sales and go-to-market strategy for commercial effectiveness. Stephanie, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for being on it. I'm so excited to talk to you. We've had a pre-call and it went on for a long time. I wish we would have recorded that. So thanks for giving us your time. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for inviting me, Ed. I'm really excited to be here today and talk to you about some exciting topics around sales.
Well, on that note, I know we had a little bit of discussion around the challenge of transforming teams at scale. And one of my questions for you was, when you're hiring salespeople or when you're actually going in and trying to transform behavior within an existing organization, how do you identify whether somebody has that it factor or the raw materials or the capability or the will to do what it takes to be an effective salesperson? And I know we've thought about all those qualities. Are they curious? Do they lean in? Do they take action? Are they empathetic? But maybe those aren't the qualities. I don't know. So I'm kind of curious your thoughts on at scale finding those all stars who are going to, run through walls and do it in a really effective way.
Great question. And it's a conversation I have quite often with our clients, and one that I experienced myself in my career as being a chief sales officer and being responsible for talent. And it's such an interesting topic because when we think about the role of the chief sales officer, we often think about growth, right? That's the number one thing we're in charge of is growing revenue within an organization, no matter what the size is. And we often think about things like, well, we need better marketing, we need better demand gen, we need a better solution, we need a better product. But the number one largest item on our P&L is going to be talent. And that's our sellers that are really representing our solution to the market so that we can gain market share and realize value with our clients. But it's the most under-leveraged tool the CRO uses. They often think about all the other things I mentioned without focusing on transforming and attracting talent to the organization. So when we think about that, what we've often run into when we're talking to our chief revenue officers around this specific topic is, well, I have gut instinct. I know people from my past. I've seen them perform repeatedly in a similar scenario, or they've got, they're always curious, they're always agile, they always make their number. They always, at the end of the quarter, they have heroics and they make their number. But how do you actually quantify this to say, these are the specific traits we need in order to drive the revenue at scale? So not just the one or two people we may know, but now as you grow your organization, you're that much more removed from the talent pipeline as well. So we're starting to think about a more scientific approach to that, which is beyond what you've seen in proven performance, because you don't always know how they're going to perform in your organization. There's a different operating model, there's a different environment, there's a different go-to-market strategy. So we can scientifically look at now and assess, what does high performance look like for a business development person, an account manager, or a customer success person within your organization? And then what are the specific behaviors, traits, and skills they need to be high performing in your company? And what we tend to find that there are common ones like curiosity, agility. There's ones like taking action, which I'd call leaning in, right? The curiosity one's really important because that helps us overcome a lot of the fears we have when we're talking to clients about new solutions, new clients
Yep.
about solutions, for
Mhm.
example. Like, I'm really curious about what you think. So it doesn't, those are the kinds of traits that we look for. But moving from relying on our own expertise and relying on what's worked for us in the past and moving toward more scientifically, what are the specific traits for my organization that will help me attract the right talent and the right skills at scale?
And are you identifying those traits through an interview process, or are you mostly looking to their historical behavior in previous organizations and speaking to their references? What is the what do you rely on most in those situations?
It's actually, and it is a specific tool that we use at Korn Ferry, which is called success profiles and assessments. And it's really, it's a great system. And what we really look at is, okay, again, what does high performance look like within your organization within this specific role? And there's an assessment process that is more around psychometrics. And there's probably about 100 questions within this assessment. And as you're taking it, you're not looking to create biases within the assessment. You're really being who you are. And because these questions are asked and scenarios are presented in so many different ways, you're looking for the consistencies that come out, show that through your behaviors versus me saying in an interview situation with you, oh my gosh, yeah, I achieved $6 million in net new sales last year at my old organization. And this is the way I did it. It's relying less on my own biases and things that I think you want to hear as my hiring manager, and pairing that up with, how do I really behave? What are my true traits and behaviors and skills that are undeniable through taking these psychometric assessments?
That's great. So now I know there's often a lot of founders who will listen to this or have startups and they can't afford Corn Ferry. So how would they perhaps,
Yes, they can.
do the job as well as you all do, but without the same resources? What would you
Yeah.
recommend?
I think it's really important to think at a couple things, and there are different, there are different levels that we can engage with startups and founders. We do a lot of work with those firms, and you just take it as a sampling of a larger population, and then use that as a template. So it's actually, we work with organizations like that all the time. But the most important thing is that consistency as well, and not going back to the old behaviors of just the people I know
Yeah.
in my network and the people that I've seen perform well in other organizations. Where we see the highest rate of attrition in sellers is when they've performed well in one organization, they come to the new organization and they are not successful. And that is very costly to you as the manager. It's very costly to the organization that has to onboard them and train them. It's costly with client relationships who's like, well, Stephanie was just my account representative and now Stephanie's gone.
Yeah. Yeah.
So this, it's hire, slow, fire fast,
Mhm.
and really making sure that you've got consistency and know what you need as that hiring manager. So for example, if you're in growth mode and you need somebody that is really business development oriented and they're going to go out and seek and pursue a new market, it's a very different skill set than somebody who's going to once the account's landed, expand that account. Very different
Mhm.
skill set. Sometimes as hiring managers, we don't see that. We're just like, sales is sales.
Yep.
So being very specific. There's also some great tools you can use with AI now, with AI interviewing, that teases these scenarios out of people before you hire them. So they can be part of the panel, so, or people that people talk to before they join the organization. And they can seek out these different skills and traits in the interviewee that as humans, we just don't know how to do that consistently. So using
Mhm.
AI interfaces as part of your interview panel to bring people in and tease out those scenarios. So asking them different questions like, let's role play, and I'm a new client, and what are you saying to me? And giving
Mhm.
them the coaching along the way of whether or not they're a good fit from a skill perspective. So it's
Yeah.
amazing what we can do now just using some of the AI tools out there.
Oh, I know. It's unbelievable how quickly things are moving and how much functionality and just the benefits in so many different areas of business with AI. It's fantastic. So, well, on that note, with AI, what are some of the tools aside from the one you just mentioned that Korn Ferry is using or you're seeing that are actually really being successfully applied in business today? Because I know that enterprise, the initial sort of foray into sort of test cases with AI, apparently back in 2025, maybe even late 2024, there were some misfires and some experimental AI applications that didn't really provide great outcomes. And I know that that's changing now, but what have you seen that has been really impactful so far in terms of AI in support of salespeople?
Wow, there's a number of them out there that we use. Before I go there, though, I think what's most important to sales leaders is what impact is it going to make? Because
Mhm.
where we've seen a lot of our leaders, our commercial leaders, stumble a little bit. We know AI is out there. We know it's changing the buyer landscape. We know it's changing the seller landscape. We know that it's accelerating knowledge at exponential rates that humans can't even keep up with. And the trick really is, how do we use those tools to augment human performance versus replace human performance? That's really, really critical. And working, how do we have AI and salespeople work together versus have one be taking over certain roles and so forth? So that's a really critical topic to talk about. And I think also even on the hiring side is that we're data driven people as sales leaders, and we want to know the impact that anything we apply to our selling methodology, processes has very specific outcomes.
Yep.
On the hiring side, we know that when we go and are consistent with hiring for certain behaviors and traits and skills, and we're very specific about what those are in each role, that the impact on pipeline velocity, the impact on win rates, and impact on quota attainment is exponential. We're talking double digits, which means no matter how big you are, that is a huge impact on your growth. So it's really about, and I know I went backwards on you there for a minute on the hiring part, but that's why it's so important to change our behaviors as hiring managers from the way we used to do things of gut instinct and past performance and relying only on references to really thinking about what are the specific things we need for this person to be successful and do they have them. So
Yeah, and it's
relating that to the output.
and that's a great I'm so glad you brought up outcomes because it's been so interesting just in the last few months, especially after OpenClaw came out and Opus 4.6 and some of the new frontier models, really gave a strong glimpse, for everyone into the power and potential of AI, and it's really transformed our sort of understanding of the value of traditional SaaS platforms, and they're becoming obsolete because if there's not some agentic capability that is native to it, they're already sort of missing the mark. And it's been amazing to see how quickly this new technology has flourished and all the different ways in which it can help companies really kind of target outcomes more so than process. You know, in a typical SaaS platform that's sort of CRUD based, where you'd have the tedious time of entering information, extracting information, and all that just heavy lift associated with interacting with traditional systems. Now, you know, you can really be focused on what you need and getting it quickly, and I think a lot of the pricing models in SaaS are switching from seat-based models to outcome-based,
Consumption.
compensation. Yeah, and
Yeah.
stuff,
Yeah.
yeah.
We went through that transformation at one of the organizations I worked with. Now, it predated AI, but it was more of the cloud transformation, but very similar in terms of available information and the expectation on humans to have that at their fingertips and be able to assimilate it very, very quickly in terms of creating client outcomes and impact. And I think about a conversation I had with our GM of product the other day, and we were talking about our AI features and functionalities in one of our platforms. And it is still really critically important to understand the importance of a human insights in sales specifically. So for example, with all the tools we have out there, right? We've got things embedded with Gong, we've got things with Udemy, we've got things with Salesforce, we've got all these different embedded tools to bring intelligence to our sellers. So when they're in front of a client, they have the latest, most up-to-date information at their fingertips. But if
Mhm.
all we're doing as sellers is reading that information as a transcript when we're talking to our client, we don't add any value.
Mhm.
And there's two key things that we need to do as sellers when it comes to augmenting our processes with tools, with AI tools. One is that we have to gut check the hallucinations that AI still has.
Mhm.
And I have multiple examples of, based on my own expertise and experience, I'm able to say to whatever tool we're using, and we use ChatGPT, Enterprise, and Copilot as well. That doesn't seem right. Can you recheck this and make sure everything is backed with data? And it will come back with, you're right. I made this assumption based on XYZ. So humans can do that. And it's very important that we do when we're using AIs. Let's fact check some things before we
Yep.
come to our final thing. The insight and oversight is something that only humans can bring to AI. So one of the things we have in our when we're talking to clients, and we've always done this throughout my career, is a meeting prep sheet. It's pretty basic sales 101. What's,
Mhm.
my client problem? What are the things I want to explore with them while we're having our conversation? How can I connect the dots and how I might be able to transform their organization and create value? Basic meeting prep sheet. Many organizations now are saying to us, well, we want AI to do that. We don't want our salespeople to actually do that work because that seems like a seller burden. It seems heavily administrative. Like, but
Mhm.
wait, there's human learning in filling out that sheet. So while we might still use AI to help us formulate that, anybody can do this now in ChatGPT or Copilot, it's not IP. We still need to look over it as humans and make sure that we understand the information and that we're still connecting dots and that we're not just reading a transcript because anybody can do that.
Mhm.
Right. So as we're using these tools, one, let's make sure we're checking on the hallucinations that still happen, right? And will continue to happen. And let's also make sure that we have human insight and oversight from our personal experiences and expertise that bring hydration and life to these facts.
So well said, and that's been a concern of mine, really also as a parent, when I see my children using now AI, and I want them to learn how to prompt it and to leverage it. But then you wonder, are they applying that critical thinking in that instance, and that's the way of the future? Or are they losing the critical thinking because they haven't been down in the mix and just kind of figuring it out on their own? And it makes me worry that, like, we all rely heavily on our cell phones. But if I had to make that cell phone, I have no idea how to make it, right? But it's essential. And if we had some EMP bomb or something go off, what would
We
we all
survived.
do, right?
Right.
So it is a concern. Is technology moving so quickly that it's outpacing our ability to evolve with it? We can evolve with it, but become so dependent on it that might make us helpless in the absence of it?
And arguably that started with our kids' generation and the whole
Mhm.
evolution of the web. I mean, that really wasn't the internet and being able to have all that information. We still had to gather that information and make sense of it. I think AI is doing that for us now in a lot of the applications. But is it an opportunity for humans to actually be more focused on critical thinking and decision making? Because we're still taking the information and ideally applying that with our own insights and oversights. It's not just
Mhm.
direct application. That's where we're going to get in trouble. I had a really interesting conversation with a client the other day, and they're in the technology vertical, and they hire a lot of software coders, software developers. And they said, well, all this stuff with AI now and, Python and all these different tools, we actually can augment a lot of the programming work through AI.
Mhm.
So then we started thinking about how does that change education and what's happening now at our colleges and universities in terms of what do we teach there differently now to work with AI early in our careers so that we're coming to the workforce, probably not entry level anymore, just doing the coding, but actually at a higher level within the organization that's oversight and insight into that coding. Because it still needs to be quality tested by humans. It still needs to be have applicable use cases and so forth by humans. But a lot of the work that was done by humans can be done by AI. How does that change what we're learning in schools and where we're focusing human thought?
It's a huge question, and I don't know. I think we're going to have to figure out how to get how we can't depend on AI as the oracle as much as AI needs to be shoulder to shoulder with you through through a thought progression in a way so that,
Yeah.
and that naturally does happen, I think, when people are properly sort of prompting AI and collaborating with it in that respect. But I worry that too often people are just going to say, give me the answer. And they're not going to know how they got there. Right.
100%. But it
Yeah.
also reminds me, and I'm gonna date myself here, but when I was going through, school, we always had to do long math because 'cause they're like, "One day there
Right.
might not be a
Yeah.
calculator there for you." And I could do math very quickly in my head, but there's nobody that doesn't use a calculator through school anymore. Nobody tries to make you do long math.
Yeah.
Like, you don't need to know.
My son used that exact same example with me just the other day. And,
Yeah.
it's true. So, well, that actually brings me to another question in terms of transformation. What do you think is the proper blend between the time spent on nurturing or training or ongoing sort of learning out efforts relative to their core requirements, which is, kind of the doing of their job? And have you identified, is there a 10% training every day to 90%? Or like, how do you all think of that in terms of the proper time allocation or resources allocation for, continuing education?
It's a great question, and it also speaks, a lot to adult learning and how adults learn and apply differently as we evolve and as we, grow in our careers as well. And I remember being very frustrated, and I am less so today, but more frustrated in the past, where we would invest in training and development for our sellers. And we would say, okay, there's certain skills or there's a sales process we're learning differently, whether it's medic or spin or, challenge or whatever the different ones were. We think this methodology is going to help us increase sales and increase achievement for you personally. So we're going to take these courses. But then people left those sessions and they went back to their old way of doing things because it was easier. So what's the way that we actually embed the learning throughout people's work to change the way they work and reinforce and build on this muscle so that it becomes part of their day-to-day work? And that's the biggest part of sustain. You'd hinted at the beginning of our conversation. It's like, so we're transforming. Most organizations spend time, money, resources, no matter how big you are, to do that transformation. And then you have to sustain it to see the impact, right?
Mhm.
Otherwise, you'll spend a lot of money and not see the results. And this is
Yeah.
really critical in conversations I have every day. So there's a couple ways to do that. One is like, let's figure out what skills they need. It's not a
Mhm.
peanut butter brush, but let's figure out what skills they need to get to this next level of competency and capabilities. And then let's figure out how we embed that in their day to day work. One of the more common ways today is through technology, where we actually have coaches embedded in the work we do. Like Gong has this. We have a platform that's embedded in Salesforce that does this. And what it does is it basically, when you come into your work environment in the day as a seller, you can't avoid it. The first thing that comes up is your coach that's saying, "Have you done these three things today that are critical for you to move these key opportunities forward?" That's just an illustrative example. But you can't go forward in your day until you complete that screen. You can't access anything else in your day.
Right.
And so and no matter what level you are, I mean, I'm a senior seller, you're a senior salesperson. It's super helpful to have that come right up front and say, these are the three things you need to do today to get to your results, right? And then you've got those embedded in your workflow and everything you're doing, whether it's preparing for a client meeting, whether it's doing a strategy internally with the team, all these different things. And it's just being reinforced through everything you do until it becomes muscle memory. So technology has come a long, long way in all different scale levels of affordability, whether we're talking to founders or all the way up through to large enterprise organizations, that you can embed this in workflows. And then additionally, it is a learning journey. It isn't just a point in time. So, what are the things that the milestones where people need to have a check in to say, okay, we're actually seeing the application of the skills learned in these specific areas. And as a result, we're seeing leading indicators of change. So, for example, if I'm going through a skills training around a new methodology, and there's always business drivers for this. So let's say the main business drivers sales cycles are too long. It's taking us too long to get from identifying a deal to closing it. Then it's like, okay, well, we've applied this new methodology and we can see our sales cycles have shortened by, 90 days, or they've been shortened by 30 days, or whatever the right metric is. But making sure that not only is it embedded, the learning is a journey, that it's embedded in our workflows, but that we're measuring indicators of leading indicators of success as we go along, because we know the things we want to see, like pipeline velocity, win rates, and revenue attainment, are going to be lagging indicators of success. So, really important that it isn't just a point in time that we talk about learning journeys, it's embedded in the workflow, and that we have milestones to check in on the measurements of leading indicators of success.
Yeah, that's great. I think that far too often sales leaders are just really focused on those lagging indicators and, hey, did we hit our number? And by the time they get there, they have no idea, what behaviors led to that number or led to missing it, right? And when if you're leading a sales team and let's say you have 100 people and perhaps the churn rate is relatively high and you don't have a good handle on those leading indicators, what would be the if you could pick 3 tools or if you could pick 3 different processes to put in place to encourage or identify the best leading behaviors? And this might be a tough question to answer right off the bat, but I think this podcast, we really kind of started for sales leaders who have to deal with the immense challenge of managing large teams or even small teams. And how do you identify that talent? How do you bring them on? How do you get them up to speed? And how do you either unfortunately weed them out or find another role for them or make them better quicker? And I think it's been our experience that a lot of training programs in general are sort of too short and incomplete because
Mhm.
they'll get a lot of information when they're onboarded and then they're out there and you want them to get to where you need them to get by month 3 or month 6, but a lot of times it's a little bit opaque. You don't know whether you don't know whether you're tracking the right things, whether they be leading or lagging indicators. And so how do you know someone's on? I guess I should ask this better. How do you know someone, a new person, for example, is on pace and developing as they, should? And and what are the main things you look for?
Great question. You touched on one that probably isn't as obvious, or wasn't as obvious to me when I was leading large sales teams. And today, thinking about it as well, is how important onboarding is. Really critically important. So it's not only about the product knowledge or solution knowledge, right? Making sure people understand what is it I'm actually selling. That's important, right? Market position and market fit, but also how they're onboarding culturally in the organization. So are they fitting in? Are they networking well? Are they creating, teams and communities within the organization where they're truly connecting to others that can help them be successful and where they can help others be successful? Skipping onboarding is one of the biggest mistakes I see leaders make, or not monitoring that to make sure people actually are um, taking the time to get the competencies right and up level their own capabilities in the role. And that any size organization, it's just critically important. One, you as sales leaders, we tend to have this sense of urgency of like create pipeline, right? That's why you were hired. We need to create pipeline. Skip all that stuff. We can get through that later. And then just start
Mhm.
putting their people in front of clients, right? Sales cycles are gonna be way longer, and the client satisfaction is gonna be much lower because 'cause they're like, "Do they even understand what their value proposition is in the market specific to this, their value
Uh-huh.
differentiators?" Right? So, never skip onboarding, make sure that it's done and it's done properly, not only in terms of the solution and product knowledge, but culturally fitting into the organization. That's going to increase their chances of longevity as well. I think the second piece is when we're thinking about leading indicators, it depends on the role, right? Whether you're in a new business development, like a hunting position or a farming position. But let's take hunting as an example first. We're going to want to see pipeline velocity. So, are we seeing them new opportunities? Like if we have a CRM, are we seeing new opportunities starting to fill in the pipeline, right? And are we at any even if you don't have a CRM, are we starting to see that number of client meetings? One thing you don't wanna do when you have a senior seller, and especially in a business development role, is start saying you have to have 5 meetings a week. I mean, that is an operational metric. When we wanna talk about commercial excellence, it's are they getting in front of the right people with the right message consistently? So we wanna see that grow, right? We also wanna see what's the progression through the sales process. So it's great if they have 10 conversations in a week, but then what? Are they actually taking it to that next level to say, sounds like we've got a there there. Let's have a next discussion around exploring if there's a fit for where your gaps are. And let me tell you what we heard and then how we might approach that together. So making sure they're progressing through the sales process, really important indicators, and that time is shrinking. So we think about how long an average sales cycle might be in our organization. We all want that to be shorter, right? Without missing any key steps. But if it's taking them 30 days to get from their first meeting to the second one of discovery, let's say, that's too long. So are we
Yep.
seeing that time shrink in terms of the next means of the progression? And then one that's kind of edging into like lagging indicators is what's their close one ratio. So
Mhm.
if they've opened 10 opportunities or they're talking to 10 clients and they're taking 100 days to get through that, let's say that's a long time for an organization. Are they how many of those are ending up as, there wasn't a fit and we moved on, or yes, we won that opportunity and we're creating new business revenue. That would be in a hunter role. That's how I'd be starting to think about it, right? Is pipeline velocity and quality pipeline. A lot of organizations don't look at the closed lost, and that's critically important, especially when you're new in an organization and you're saying, okay, Stephanie might have opened 100 opportunities this year. She closed lost over 50% of that. So is that Stephanie's inability to close a sale, or is it, I hate talking about myself in third person, but I just thought I use myself in this example. Or is it, that I'm not connecting the solution with the right market?
Yeah.
Am I not talking about the value proposition the right way? Is there an opportunity there to go back and increase my competencies in those areas to increase my win rate?
Yep.
So, yeah.
Well, I was just on that point. It's funny. I was listening to an interview recently with a sales leader who and how common it was for him to come across seasoned salespeople who still didn't understand the importance of value selling, who literally still sold on price, and how kind of shocking it is. And it's been interesting in my brief career in sales. I've come across a lot of salespeople that thought it was crazy that I wanted them to focus on value, and they're just it like they couldn't make that paradigm shift because they didn't understand that it wasn't really about the price. It was about that store of value that you were trying to align with the customer on to capture. And if you don't have value, then obviously price has no it's not rooted in anything. And it makes a lot of sense to me. I think initially, probably when I first started learning about sales, it didn't. But what's interesting is how many people have made their way through sales careers and have never still really grasped that.
It's a tough one, and it's something that I'll get on my soapbox about. There's another, another dated term, but is
Mhm.
a soapbox about, and anybody who's worked on my team knows I'm very passionate about value selling. And you can even think, as you were asking that question or introducing that topic, I was thinking, well, okay, there's some things that are just a commodity, right? Like nails in a hardware store. But is it really? Like the value differentiators now, my local hardware store, when I go in and I need a pound of nails, and that person actually comes and says to me, well, wait a second, what do you need them for? And are you using this or are you using that? And are you doing this or is your husband doing this? That's the value differentiator, is actually the distributor of the nails, not making it
Yeah.
the nail, right? And so there's commodity sales, but you still need to have value in a commodity sale. I think
Mhm.
about instances in our world where we have RFPs that we respond to. And the first thing commonly coming out of a salesperson's mind when they're responding to an RFP, a request for proposal, is, well, we've got to win on price. I'm like, or is this an opportunity to introduce a value differentiator? Because it's a quick spiral to the bottom here. If you're
Mhm.
just going, there's going to be zero margin and you're going to be underwater on this overall deal, which is bad business, which is business we don't want. So
Right.
why not introduce what's your specific value differentiator from all your competitors that are also responding to the RFP that allows you to charge more? And
Absolutely.
customers love value. They love value, and they're measured on the value of implementing products and services. So that's a key thing. It's a mindset too. I think many sellers come into this world of, I have a quota and I have to get my quota, and I can do it the scrappy way by reducing the price and discounting everything to get to my quota, or I can sell larger deals that have value in them, and it might take me a little bit longer, but I'll have fewer deals, but they're really based in value. And so it's a bit of a mindset shift of how are your sellers thinking about growth for themselves, commercial success for themselves, which turns into growth for the organization,
Mhm.
right? It's the differentiator you have, a unique differentiator you have when you're talking to your client that says to them, I will pay a premium for this.
And do you think in the process of value selling, it's critical that you first go through a phase of discovery with the client to identify that store of value and have them quantify it, have them go through the math of literally understanding how much money they could be making or they're losing because of existing systems that your solution would potentially remedy. But that exercise of the math, I think, is so critical, and it's critical that it's done, in my opinion, in concert with that potential customer. And sometimes they're not willing to give that math or they don't know it. So what have you found? Are there tactics or are there ways to I guess it's all about earning trust, but are there ways to more quickly, I would say, get to the the cooperation to share those numbers so you can quantify that value you're seeking to capture?
It's critical, and it's an important part of sales training and sales methodology to understand that you need to do that right up front with your client. Again, oftentimes these are people we've just met, and we're trying to quickly build that trust. When we can have conversations that say things like, you know, what are the business drivers? You've identified this problem. You've high churn in your talent. You're not meeting your sales numbers, or you've acquired a new organization. You've got all this new talent coming in, and you're not sure how to make them productive or get faster time to productivity within your organization. What are the business drivers? What are you seeing that's making you say there's a problem here? And that
Mm.
helps the client co-create metrics with you, which is really powerful. And they
Yeah.
start going, oh, yeah, well, I'm missing my number. It also helps you backwards engineer it with them in a really safe place to say, maybe it isn't the churn of my talent. Maybe it's something else that's causing people to leave the organization or not hit the performance metrics that we have in place. Maybe it's actually something else. So then you find out, okay, here's what you're telling me are all the symptoms. Let's go find out what the cause is together.
Mhm.
And then they're in a safe place because most people don't know until they go through a more quantifiable discussion, exploratory path of what it actually is. They'll tell you all the symptoms, they don't know the cause. When you get to the cause, now you can talk about, okay, what if we moved it from here to here? So right now you're seeing, 3% growth in this particular segment. What if we could move that to 6% growth? What if we could double that? What would that do to your overall numbers? And they're like, okay, great. Okay. Well, through our backwards engineering and co-creating this together, what we actually learned was it's these three things that are causing the problem. So let's go fix those three things and then measure it this way.
Yeah.
And those are such fun conversations. 'Cause you
Mhm.
put the guard down. I think so many people, especially at the VP level and above, think they're supposed to know all the answers. And they don't.
Yeah.
Otherwise, every company would be growing double digits.
Right.
And it's okay. It's okay. Right?
I love the actual wording you use there. It made it feel so collaborative and exploratory and safe to kinda just I think that the way you actually just worded that and how you would actually get somebody to go shoulder to shoulder with you and discovering those numbers, right? That's part of the craft of sales, and you know it well, clearly. Well, listen, we're almost at time here. I could talk to you all day. This has been wonderful.
So
I think
fun.
before we and we'll do it again, but before we sign off, you mentioned earlier that Korn Ferry actually works often with startups. I know
Yes.
Korn Ferry has such a wonderful reputation and obviously works with the biggest companies in the world. I didn't realize that you all worked with startups as well, and so
We do.
could you give us as before we leave, just sort of a little bit of insight into how Korn Ferry does work with startups and where they probably, can be most helpful?
No problem at all. So it's interesting because we work across all segments of the industry and all industries. What the common challenges where clients talk to us is that they have a growth problem. And so when you're a startup, oftentimes, especially if you have a very unique value proposition in the market, you're just growing because there's such demand in the market for what you have, right? But then you get to the point of it's like, okay, but how do I now scale this growth? So I'm in incubate. What are the processes, the people, the things I need in place to go to that next level of growth? And so we have a whole consulting team that will work with as small as 8 people on a team or as small as a couple people on a team to really think about the strategy that's required to get out of incubate and into graduate. Where I think about like incubate, graduate, scale. How do we move into that next level? We also help organizations say, okay, well, what's your exit strategy, right? As a founder, you might say, hey, I want to grow this to be $500 million in sales. And then I want it out and I want a PE firm to take over the business, or I want to go IPO, right? I want to go and build to the next level. So we help those organizations with a strategy specifically around talent and specifically around organizational process and execution to say, how do you get to that next level? Because it's
Mhm.
always about growth. Most of us aren't founders of things to just say, hey, this was super fun and I happened to make $1 billion out of doing it. I mean, that would be nice. But at some point, there's a commercial model in here for us that we want to grow that to X. And then we either want to take it public or we want a private equity firm to take us over, whatever. So it's really helping those organizations with the strategy, very specific to people, processes, and execution.
Yeah, great. Well, I'm sure lots of startup founders who are watching this will probably be intrigued to talk to Korn Ferry now. So that's wonderful. So,
Great. Thank you
um,
for asking.
yeah, and thank you again for being on the show. We'll have to do it again for sure.
Well,
And we'll until next time.
wonderful. Thanks so much,
Stephanie.
Ed.
Bye.